For 15,000 years, humanity was silent until their ghost warship crossed the stars again. The great hall of the Citadel of Voices was nearly empty. Only 12 scholars sat in the curved seats that could hold thousands. They looked bored. Some were already checking their communication devices. Others whispered to each other about lunch plans. At the center of the hall stood Velis. She was a Sulfari, a species that looked like a tall moth with soft gray wings folded behind her back. Her large dark eyes reflected the dim lights of the ancient chamber. She had spent 40 years preparing for this moment, 40 years of research, 40 years of being laughed at, and now, finally, she had the chance to present her findings to the academic council. Honored scholars, she began, her voice steady despite her nerves. I am here to discuss humanity. One of the council members groaned loudly. Another rolled his 6 eyes. Humanity was old news, dead news. Every child in the Galactic Concord knew the story. 15,000 years ago, humans had been one of the founding species of the Concord. They had been builders and dreamers, warriors and poets. They had helped create the peace that still held the galaxy together. And then they vanished. No war destroyed them. No plague swept through their worlds. No natural disaster burned their planets. One day, human ships filled the space lanes. The next day, they were gone. Earth went dark. The colonies fell silent. Search parties found nothing but empty cities and cold stations. It was the greatest mystery in galactic history. Most scholars believed humans had died from some unknown cause. Perhaps a secret weapon that backfired. Perhaps a disease too fast to escape. The galaxy mourned for a century, built monuments, wrote songs of loss. Then slowly, as centuries became millennia, humanity faded from memory to legend, from legend to myth. But Velis believed something different. The accepted theory is extinction, she continued, pulling up images on the holographic display. But extinction leaves evidence. Bodies, ruins, wreckage. When the Teth Empire fell, we found their bones scattered across 100 worlds. When the singing colonies died, their empty shells floated in space for 10,000 years. She changed the image. It showed an empty human city, perfectly preserved. Humanity left nothing. Every structure was carefully taken apart. Every ship was recalled to Earth before the silence began. Every station was powered down in the correct sequence. This was not death. This was departure. The council members shifted uncomfortably. This was old ground. Velis had been making this argument for decades. And there is one more thing, she said. Something we have ignored for far too long. She brought up a new image. It showed a small satellite floating in the darkness of space. At the edge of former human territory, there is a beacon. It has been broadcasting for 15,000 years. It repeats a single message in 10,000 languages. Velis pressed a button. A voice filled the hall, a human voice, speaking words that made the scholars sit up straight for the first time. We will return when we are needed. Do not follow. The hall was silent. Velis felt hope rising in her chest. Then the eldest scholar, a massive crystalline being named Torith, spoke. We have heard this recording before, young Sulfari. It proves nothing. A message left behind by a dying species, perhaps meant to give them dignity in death. Your obsession with humanity is noted, but the council has real matters to attend to. The other scholars nodded. They began to gather their things. Velis wanted to scream. She wanted to tell them that humanity was not dead, that the message was a promise, that somewhere out there in the darkness between stars, humans were waiting. But she had no proof, only a feeling in her heart. She bowed her head in defeat, and then the alarms began. The sound was so old that most species had never heard it. It was the first contact alarm, designed thousands of years ago for the arrival of new species from unknown regions of space. It had not sounded in living memory. Torith's crystalline body flickered with confusion. What is this? A young technician burst through the doors, his scales flushed with panic. Honored scholars, a ship has been detected emerging from the void between galaxies. The void between galaxies. It was a region of absolute emptiness, millions of light years of nothing. No species had ever crossed it. No species had ever tried. There was nothing there but darkness and death. Impossible, Torith said. Nothing can survive the void. The ship is real, the technician insisted. It is heading toward Concord space at speeds that should not exist. And its identification codes. He paused, his voice dropping to a whisper. The codes are 15,000 years old. They are human codes. Velis felt her heart stop. Both of them. The next few hours were chaos. The Concord Council was called into emergency session. Fleets were mobilized. Sensor stations across the galaxy focused on the approaching ship. And Velis stood in the corner of the command center, watching history unfold on the screens. The ship was massive. It was larger than any station in Concord space, larger than most moons. Its design matched nothing in any database, smooth curves covered in strange symbols that seemed to shift and move when viewed directly. It was beautiful in a terrible way, like looking at something that should not exist. Ambassador Torvik was chosen for first contact. He was a Cathari, a reptilian species known for their calm under pressure. He had negotiated treaties between species that had been at war for centuries. He had talked down terrorists holding thousands hostage. But even he looked nervous as he boarded his diplomatic vessel. Velis pushed her way through the crowd until she reached the ambassador's ship. "Take me with you," she said. Torvik looked down at the small moth-like scholar. "This is a diplomatic mission, not a research expedition. I have studied humanity for 40 years. I know their language, their customs, their history. If anyone can help you communicate with them, it is me." Torvik considered this. Time was short. The ghost ship was still approaching. "Get on board," he said. The journey to the intercept point took 3 hours. Velis spent most of it staring at the sensor readings, watching the ghost ship grow larger on the screens. It was even more impressive up close. The hull seemed to glow with its own inner light. The symbols on its surface formed patterns that almost looked like words. "We are being scanned," the pilot announced. Torvik straightened his diplomatic robes. "Open a channel. Standard first contact protocols," before anyone could respond. The ghost ship broadcast its own message. The voice that filled the cabin was speaking perfect Concord standard, the common language of 1,000 species. But the accent was strange, old-fashioned, like someone reading from an ancient text. "Welcome, children of the Concord. The silence is over. The shepherds have returned." Velis translated the meaning for the others, but her mind was racing. Shepherds, the old human texts sometimes used that word. It meant protectors, guardians, people who watched over flocks and kept them safe from danger. "This is Ambassador Torvik of the Galactic Concord," Torvik said carefully. "We come in peace. We request permission to board and establish diplomatic relations." There was a pause. Then a new voice responded, warmer, more personal. "Permission granted, Ambassador. A door will open for you. Follow the lights." On the hull of the massive ship, a small section began to glow. Then it slid open, revealing a passage just large enough for their vessel. The pilot looked at Torvik with wide eyes. "Proceed," the ambassador ordered. They entered the ghost ship. The interior was nothing like Velis had expected. She had imagined metal corridors and harsh lighting, the practical design of a warship. Instead, she found herself in a garden. Plants grew along the walls in impossible patterns. Flowers bloomed in colors she had never seen. The air smelled clean and fresh, like a mountain morning after rain. The diplomatic team walked slowly through the garden, following a path of soft blue lights. Velis reached out to touch one of the flowers. It was real. It was alive. "Beautiful, is it not?" The voice came from ahead. A figure stepped out of the shadows, and Velis saw a human for the first time in her life. She looked like the old images in the archives: 2 arms, 2 legs, soft skin, and dark hair. She appeared young, perhaps 30 years old by human counting. But her eyes told a different story. They were old eyes, eyes that had seen centuries pass, eyes that carried the weight of impossible decisions. "My name is Sira," the human said. "Welcome to the last promise." Torvik stepped forward and bowed in the formal Concord style. "I am Ambassador Torvik. We represent the Galactic Concord. We have many questions." Sira smiled, but there was sadness in it. "I know you do, and I will answer them all. But first, you must see what we have brought. You must understand why we left and why we have returned." She turned and began to walk deeper into the ship. The diplomatic team followed, passing through gardens and corridors filled with light. They entered a vast open space, and Velis gasped. The ship was not a warship at all. It was an ark. Below them stretched a habitat the size of a small country. She saw forests and lakes, mountains and valleys. She saw cities of glass and stone, built in a style that matched no human architecture from the old records. And she saw people, millions of humans, living and working and raising families, preserved across 15,000 years of silence. This is what became of us, Sira said quietly. We did not die. We did not run away. We prepared. Torvik found his voice. Prepared? For what? Sira did not answer. For 15,000 years, humanity was silent until their ghost warship crossed the stars again. The news spread across the galaxy like fire through dry grass. Humanity had returned. The dead had risen from their graves among the stars, on 1,000 worlds. Statues of ancient human heroes were cleaned for the first time in centuries. Old recordings of human music played in public squares. Scholars who had dismissed humanity as a footnote in history suddenly found their inboxes flooded with interview requests, but the joy was mixed with fear, because the news of the Devourers spread just as quickly. Ambassador Torvik stood in the council chamber of the Citadel, addressing the full galactic concord for the first time since the emergence. 3,000 species were represented in the vast hall. Some were ancient, their civilizations stretching back millions of years. Others were young, barely a few centuries into their starfaring age. All of them were afraid. The threat is real, Torvik said, his voice amplified to reach every corner of the chamber. I have seen the darkness with my own eyes. 40 systems have already been consumed. Trillions of citizens are dead or missing. And according to the humans, it is only the beginning. The chamber erupted into chaos. Species that had been at peace for millennia began pointing fingers at each other. Old rivalries resurfaced. Fear turned to anger, and anger turned to accusations. Only one section of the chamber remained calm. The human delegation sat quietly, watching the chaos with patient eyes. They wore simple white robes, nothing like the elaborate costumes of the other species. Their leader, Sira, had her hands folded in her lap. She looked like someone waiting for a storm to pass. Velis sat in the observation gallery above the main floor, taking notes on everything she saw. She had been assigned as an official liaison to the human delegation, a reward for her decades of research. But she suspected it was also a way to keep her out of more important meetings. Nobody really believed that a scholar could contribute to what was coming. After an hour of shouting, the chamber finally fell quiet. High Commander Kreth of the Veth Hegemony rose to speak. He was a massive creature, nearly 3 meters tall, covered in thick armored plates that had been polished to a mirror shine. The Veth were the most powerful military force in the Concord, and they had grown strong in humanity's absence. We have only the word of these so-called shepherds that this threat even exists, Kreth said, his voice dripping with contempt. They vanished for 15,000 years. They abandoned us, and now they return with stories of monsters in the dark. How convenient. Murmurs of agreement rippled through parts of the chamber. Not everyone trusted the humans. Some were jealous of the attention they were receiving. Others remembered old conflicts from before the silence. Sira stood slowly. She did not raise her voice. She did not gesture dramatically. She simply spoke, and somehow everyone listened. High Commander Kreth raises a fair point. You have no reason to trust us. We have been gone for 15,000 of your years. Entire civilizations have risen and fallen in our absence. We are strangers to you now. She paused, and her dark eyes swept across the chamber. But we did not leave because we were afraid. We did not hide because we were cowards. We left because we saw what was coming, and we knew we could not fight it alone. We needed time. Time to grow. Time to build. Time to become something more than we were. She touched a device on her wrist, and the center of the chamber filled with a holographic image. It showed the devourer that terrible darkness that drank the light. This is not a species. It is not an army. It is a wound-in reality itself, a hunger that slipped through from somewhere else long ago. It feeds on existence, matter, energy, even thought. Where it passes, nothing remains. Not ruins, not memories, not even the possibility that something once existed. The image shifted, showing a timeline. It stretched back millions of years. We have tracked its path across the universe. It moves slowly, but it never stops. It has consumed galaxies before ours. And now it is here. Kreth slammed his fist against his podium. Lies, fear-mongering to make us bow to human leadership. Sira did not flinch. I understand your doubt, High Commander. So I offer proof. She changed the image again. It showed a region of space near the Veth border, a mining colony called Threshold Station. In 6 hours, the Devourer will reach Threshold Station. 18 million citizens live there, most of them Veth. You can evacuate them. You can save them. Or you can wait and watch, and see for yourself that we speak the truth. The chamber fell silent. Kreth's armored plates shifted uncomfortably. The Veth were proud, but they were not stupid. 18 million lives was not a gamble anyone wanted to lose. Begin evacuation. Kreth ordered through clenched teeth. The next 6 hours were the longest of Velus's life. She watched from the observation deck of the Last Promise. As refugee ships streamed away from Threshold Station, families carried whatever they could. Children cried for toys left behind. The elderly were carried on stretchers. Sira stood beside her, watching the exodus with sad eyes. You have done this before, Velus said quietly. 15,000 years ago. You evacuated your own people. Sira nodded. It was the hardest thing we ever did, leaving everything behind. Our cities, our monuments, our graves. She paused. Some of us are still alive who remember that day. The weight of it never goes away. Velus turned to look at her. How old are you? Sira smiled, but it did not reach her eyes. Old enough to remember the taste of real Earth rain. Old enough to remember the last sunset over the Pacific Ocean. She looked out at the stars. Old enough to be tired. The evacuation finished with an hour to spare. Every citizen of Threshold Station was safe aboard refugee vessels, heading toward the inner Concord. The station itself stood empty, its lights still shining, waiting for the darkness. And then it came. Velus watched on the sensors as the Devourer approached. It did not look like a creature. It did not look like a weapon. It looked like a hole in the universe, a place where the stars simply ended. As it drew closer, the sensors began to fail. First the long-range scanners went dark, then the visual feeds, then the energy readings. And then there was nothing. Where Threshold Station had been, there was only darkness. Not the darkness of empty space, but something deeper. Something wrong. Looking at it made Velus feel sick in ways she could not describe. It was the absence of existence, the end of all things. The Concord Council watched in horror. Now do you believe? Sira asked softly. No one argued. Over the following days, Velus spent all her time aboard the Last Promise. She had been granted special access to study the humans and learn their story. What she found amazed her. The Ark ships were not just vessels. They were worlds unto themselves. Each one contained habitats the size of small countries, filled with forests and oceans and cities. Millions of humans lived inside, generation after generation, for 15,000 years. But they had not simply waited. We knew what was coming, explained a human named Marcus, who served as one of Velus's guides. He was a tall man with gray hair and kind eyes. So we trained. Every generation learned the skills of the generation before. We became doctors and scientists, soldiers and engineers. We mastered technologies that should have taken millions of years to develop. He showed her the training centers where human children learned to fight in zero gravity. He showed her the laboratories where scientists bent the laws of physics in ways that made Velus's head hurt. He showed her the meditation halls, where humans learned to control their minds with perfect discipline. But we also learned something else, Marcus said, leading her to a quiet garden at the heart of the ship. We learned patience. When your enemy is 15,000 years away, you cannot rush. You cannot panic. You must become calm like water. You must think in centuries, not days. He sat down on a stone bench and gestured for Velus to join him. The old humans were brilliant, but we were also foolish. We fought among ourselves over land and resources, over ideas and beliefs. We waged wars that killed millions of our own kind. That was before the silence. He looked up at the artificial sky above them. The silence changed us. When you know the enemy is extinction itself, Old grudges seem very small. We stopped fighting each other. We became one people with one purpose. Velis thought about the Concord, with its 1,000 petty conflicts and ancient rivalries. She thought about the Veth and their hunger for power. She thought about all the species who would rather blame each other than face the darkness together. Will the Concord be able to do the same? She asked. Marcus was quiet for a long moment. I do not know. We hope so. That is why we return, not just to fight, but to unite. If the galaxy faces this threat divided, we will all fall. Meanwhile, High Commander Kreth was planning something very different. In the secure chambers of his flagship, he gathered his most loyal officers. The holographic display showed the human fleet, 10,000 Ark ships, each one larger than any vessel in Concord history. They are a threat, Kreth said flatly. Not the Devourer. The humans. His officers exchanged uncertain glances. One of them, a young captain named Thesic, spoke up. High Commander, we have all seen the Devourer. The threat is real. I do not deny the threat, Kreth snapped. But think, if humanity leads the fight against this monster, they will become heroes. The Concord will worship them. And where will that leave us? The Veth hegemony has been the shield of the galaxy for 15,000 years. Humanity was silent until their ghost warship crossed the stars again. The galaxy was falling apart. Every day brought news of another system consumed by the Devourer. The darkness spread in silence, swallowing stars and planets without sound or warning. Refugee ships clogged the space lanes. Billions fled toward the core worlds, hoping that distance would save them. It would not. In the Citadel of Voices, the Concord Council met in emergency session every day. Arguments echoed through the ancient halls. Some species demanded immediate military action. Others wanted to negotiate with the darkness, as if it were a creature that could be reasoned with. Still others simply gave up, spending their final days in prayer or pleasure, waiting for the end. Ambassador Torvik worked without rest. He had become the unofficial bridge between the Concord and humanity, translating not just words but ideas. It was exhausting work. The humans thought in ways that other species found difficult to understand. They were patient where others were hasty. They were calm where others were panicked. And they carried a weight of sorrow that seemed to stretch back 15,000 years. Velis stayed aboard the Last Promise, learning everything she could. She had filled dozens of data crystals with notes about human history, technology, and culture. But the more she learned, the more questions she had. Today, she was sitting with Sira in one of the meditation gardens. The artificial sun above them cast warm light on the flowers and trees. It was peaceful, almost too peaceful, given what was happening outside. I need to ask you something, Velis said. Something I have been thinking about for weeks. Sira nodded. Ask. You spent 15,000 years preparing for this moment. You built ships that can cross the void between galaxies. You developed technologies that make our best weapons look like toys. She paused, struggling to find the right words. Why can you not simply destroy the Devourer? With all your power, why do you need us? Sira was quiet for a long moment. She reached down and picked up a small stone from the garden path, turning it over in her fingers. When we first discovered the Devourer, she said slowly, we tried exactly that. We built weapons of incredible power. We created bombs that could crack planets and beams that could burn stars. We threw everything we had at the darkness. She closed her fist around the stone. It did not work. The Devourer is not a thing that can be destroyed, because it is not truly a thing at all. It is an absence, a hunger, a wound in reality itself. You cannot kill emptiness. You cannot burn nothing. She opened her hand. The stone was unchanged, but you can push it back. You can seal it away. And that is what we learned to do. Velis leaned forward. Hautsira set the stone down carefully. The Devourer feeds on existence matter, energy, thought. But there is one thing it cannot consume. One force that repels it. What? Meaning. Velis blinked. I do not understand. Sira smiled gently. The Devourer is pure destruction, pure entropy. It represents the end of all things. But meaning is the opposite. Memory, love, hope, the stories we tell about ourselves and each other, the weight of lived experience. These things have a reality that the Devourer cannot digest. She stood and walked to a small tree at the edge of the garden. Its trunk was gnarled and ancient, its branches heavy with silver leaves. This tree is 15,000 years old. It was grown from a seed brought from Earth itself. Millions of humans have sat under its branches. They have fallen in love here. They have mourned here. They have made decisions that shaped generations. She touched the bark gently. This tree is not just wood and leaves. It is saturated with meaning. It is more real than a mountain, because a mountain is just rock. This tree has been loved. Veles began to understand. You are saying that meaning can be used as a weapon? As a seal, Sira corrected. We have spent 15,000 years gathering the memories of our people. Every human aboard these ships carries within them a crystallized fragment of our history. Our joys and sorrows, our triumphs and failures, everything we have ever been. Together, we can forge these memories into a barrier that will push the devourer back. She turned to face Veles, and her old eyes were filled with pain. But it will not be enough. Humanity alone is too small. To seal the wound completely, we need the memories of every species in the Concord. We need the weight of the entire galaxy's meaning. Veles felt cold. You want people to give up their memories? Not give up. Contribute. Share. The process does not destroy memories, it copies them. Extracts their emotional weight. But it does change them. The sharp edges will soften. The most intense moments will become distant. Like stories heard secondhand instead of experience is lived firsthand. Veles thought of her grandmother, who had raised her after her parents died. She thought of those childhood mornings, learning to fly in the warm currents of their home world. She thought of the feeling of her grandmother's wings wrapping around her, keeping her safe. Would she trade that sharpness, that clarity, even to save the galaxy? It is a terrible thing to ask, Sira said quietly. We know. We have been preparing ourselves for this sacrifice for 15,000 years, and it still terrifies us. Veles found her voice. Does the council know? We are telling them today. The announcement was a disaster. Sira stood before the full Concord Council and explained what was required. She spoke gently, carefully, with all the patience her people had learned over millennia of preparation. She showed diagrams of the sealing process. She explained the science in simple terms. She promised that no one would be forced, that every contribution would be voluntary. It did not matter. The chamber erupted into chaos worse than anything Veles had ever seen. Species that had been willing to fight and die now refused to sacrifice something far more personal. You ask us to give up our souls, shouted a delegate from the Singing Worlds, his crystalline body vibrating with distress. Our memories are the foundation of our culture, cried the representative of the Thousand Masks. Without them, we are nothing. Even species that had supported humanity from the beginning hesitated. The Cathari delegate, normally so calm, stood with shaking hands. You are asking us to become strangers to ourselves, to look at our loved ones and feel less. How can you ask this? Sira waited for the noise to die down. When she spoke, her voice was soft but clear. I do not ask you to do anything that we are not willing to do ourselves. Every human aboard these ships will contribute. We will give everything we have gathered over 15,000 years. She paused. Some of us will give so much that we will not remember our own names. The chamber fell silent. I know what I am asking. I know the price is terrible, but the alternative is worse. The devourer will not stop. It will consume this galaxy and move to the next, and the next, until there is nothing left. No memories to lose. No experiences to soften. No meaning at all, anywhere, ever again. She spread her hands. We give you this choice. Sacrifice some of your meaning to save existence itself, or keep your memories sharp and clear until the moment the darkness takes them forever. The debate lasted for days. Veles watched from the observation gallery, too exhausted to take notes anymore. She saw alliances form and break. She saw species she had never heard of stand up and volunteer. She saw others storm out, refusing to participate. Slowly, painfully, the tide began to turn. The Sylphari were among the first to agree. Veles's own people, moth-like beings who valued memory above almost everything else, chose to contribute. Their representative, an elderly female named Moth Elder Tassani, spoke with quiet dignity. We remember everything, she said. Every sunset, every kindness, every loss. Our memories stretch back millions of years. But what good is memory if there is no one left to remember? We will give what is needed. Others followed. The crystalline beings of the Torith Collective, who stored memories in their very structure. The water dwellers of the deep currents, who passed memories through generations in their songs. The machine minds of the Eternal Network, who had never before agreed to share their data with organic beings. One by one, species stepped forward, but not all. High Commander Kreth and the Veth Hegemony refused absolutely. We will not weaken ourselves for human fantasies, he declared. When this scheme fails, the Veth will still be strong. We will survive. Several other military powers followed his lead. They believed their weapons would be enough. They believed the humans were exaggerating the threat. They believed that when the final battle came, force would win the day. They were wrong. But it would take time to prove it. Velis made her decision on the third night of debate. She went to the contribution center that humanity had set up aboard the Last Promise. It was a quiet space, filled with soft light and comfortable chairs. Human volunteers moved among the contributors, explaining the process, offering comfort. A young human man approached her. His name tag said David. "Are you here to contribute?" he asked gently. Velis nodded. Her wings trembled slightly. "It is okay to be afraid," David said. "Everyone is afraid. But you are doing something brave." He led her to a chair and helped her settle in. A device was placed against her head, something that hummed. For 15,000 years, humanity was silent until their ghost warship crossed the stars again. The weapon was almost complete. In the heart of the Last Promise, in a chamber built specifically for this moment, a sphere of light floated in perfect stillness. It was the size of a small moon and bright as a star. Looking at it made Velis feel strange, as if she could almost hear voices whispering. At the edge of her awareness, those were the memories of billions of beings, woven together into something greater than any individual could imagine. For 6 months, the collection had continued. Species after species had contributed their most precious moments. First loves and last goodbyes. Moments of triumph and hours of despair. The first steps of children and the final breaths of the dying. All of it had been gathered, extracted, crystallized into this single point of impossible brightness. Syrah stood before the sphere, her face illuminated by its glow. She looked tired. She looked old, older than Velis had ever seen her. The weight of 15,000 years seemed to press down on her shoulders. "Is it enough?" Velis asked. Syrah shook her head slowly. "Almost. We are close. But the Devourer has grown faster than we predicted. It has consumed 70 systems now, billions of lives, and it is accelerating." She turned away from the sphere, her movements stiff and weary. "We need more contributions, but many species have given everything they can spare. We cannot ask them to sacrifice more without risking their very identities." The door to the chamber opened, and Ambassador Torvik entered. His scales were dull from exhaustion, and his eyes were ringed with dark circles. He had not slept in days. "High Commander Kreth is finally willing to negotiate," he announced. "The Veth have lost 3 border systems to the Devourer. His confidence in military solutions is fading." Syrah nodded. "Good. Their memories would help considerably. The Veth are an ancient species with a rich martial history. Their contribution could fill the gaps we still have." Torvik hesitated. "There's a condition." "Of course there is. Kreth wants guarantees. He wants assurance that after the Devourer is sealed, the Veth will retain their position in the Concord. He fears that humanity will replace them as the military power of the galaxy." Syrah almost laughed. It was a tired sound, without much humor. "After 15,000 years of preparation, Kreth thinks we want political power?" She shook her head. "We want to go home. We want to see the stars without fear. We want to rest." She straightened her shoulders with visible effort. "Tell Kreth we guarantee nothing about the future, because the future depends on whether we survive the next few weeks. If he wants his species to exist long enough to have political ambitions, he should contribute to the seal." Torvik bowed and left. 3 days later, the Veth began contributing. Kreth watched with barely concealed disgust as his warriors sat in the extraction chairs, giving up the sharpness of their battle memories, the clarity of their victories. But he contributed himself, because he had finally seen the Devourer with his own eyes, and even his pride could not deny its horror. The sphere grew brighter, Meanwhile, Velis noticed something strange happening among the humans. They were changing. Not physically, but in the way they moved and spoke. There was a heaviness to them now, a sadness that went deeper than exhaustion. She saw parents look at their children with confusion, struggling to remember the day they were born. She saw couples hold hands and frown, trying to recall their first meeting. The humans had been contributing longer than anyone else. They had been giving pieces of themselves for months, and it was beginning to show. She found Marcus in the meditation garden, sitting alone under the ancient tree. His gray hair had gone completely white, and his kind eyes were rimmed with red. "Are you well?" she asked. He looked up at her and smiled, but it was a confused smile. "I remember you, Velis, the scholar. You like history." "Yes, I like history too. At least, I think I do. I remember that I used to spend hours reading old texts, but I cannot remember why. The feeling is gone. Just the fact remains." Velis sat down beside him. "Is it worth it?" she asked quietly. "Giving so much of yourself?" Marcus was silent for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was distant. "There was a woman, my wife. I know I loved her because I remember deciding to marry her. I remember the logical reasons. She was kind, she was brave, she made me laugh. But the actual feeling," he trailed off, "it is like reading about someone else's love story." He looked at the sphere of light glowing in the distance. "But my grandchildren will live. The galaxy will survive. Strangers I never met will raise families and tell stories and fall in love." His voice cracked. "And maybe someone will remember love the way I used to feel it. Maybe that is enough." Velis did not know what to say. She simply sat with him in silence as the artificial sun set over the garden. The final assembly came sooner than anyone expected. Syrah announced that the sphere was ready. It contained enough meaning, enough memory, enough raw weight of lived experience to seal the devourer away. But there was a problem. Someone must carry it, she told the gathered crowds. The sphere cannot seal the wound on its own. It must be placed at the heart of the devourer, where the damage to reality is deepest, and whoever carries it must pour their own memories into it as the seal forms. The chamber was silent. "The carrier will survive," Syrah continued, "but they will not remember anything afterward. Not their name, not their species, not their life. They will become a blank slate, every experience erased in the final sealing." Velis felt cold. This was not contribution. This was complete sacrifice. "I will carry it," Syrah said. The humans in the crowd began to protest. They shouted that she was too important, too valuable, too beloved. But Syrah raised her hand, and they fell silent. "I have lived for 15,000 years. I remember the old Earth, before the silence. I remember the faces of people who have been dead for millennia. I carry more meaning in myself than almost any other human alive." She smiled sadly. "That makes me the best fuel for the fire." Ambassador Torvik stepped forward. "Surely there is another way. We cannot ask you to destroy yourself." Syrah shook her head. "You are not asking. I am offering. This is what we prepared for. This is why I survived 15,000 years when I could have died peacefully centuries ago." She looked out at the crowd, humans and aliens, young and old, all united by fear and hope. "I have been waiting for this moment my entire life. Let me finish the work." No one argued after that. The fleet assembled at the edge of the Devourer's advance. 10,000 human Ark ships formed a wall of light against the darkness. Behind them, the combined forces of the Galactic Concord waited. Every warship that could be spared, every vessel that could carry weapons. They would not fight. They were there to witness. Syrah boarded a small shuttle, carrying the sphere of light in a containment field. She was alone. This was a journey she had to make by herself. As her shuttle approached the edge of the devourer, the sphere began to pulse. It was responding to the presence of the wound, the wrongness in reality. The whispered voices grew louder. Syrah closed her eyes and listened to them. She heard a Silfari grandmother singing a lullaby. She heard a Veth warrior shouting in triumph. She heard a human child laughing. She heard the last words of a dying elder, passing wisdom to the next generation. She heard love and loss, joy and sorrow, fear and hope. "This is what we are," she thought. "This is why we matter." She opened her eyes and prepared to enter the darkness. And then the devourer spoke. The voice was not a sound. It was a feeling, a cold, ancient presence that pressed against her mind. It spoke in concepts rather than words, but she understood its meaning perfectly. Give me one species, let me consume them completely. I will spare the rest for 1,000 years. Syrah's hands trembled on the shuttle. Controls, one species, a small price, the weak, the forgotten, the unnecessary. Surely you can spare one. She thought of the Concord Council, where some species were already considered less important than others. She thought of the small civilizations on the edges of the galaxy, the ones with no political power, no military strength, no famous history. Would anyone really miss them? The alternative is suffering. You will fail. Your sphere is not strong enough. You will waste yourself for nothing. Syrah felt doubt creep into her heart. The Devourer was ancient. It had seen galaxies die. Maybe it was telling the truth. Maybe the seal would not hold. Give me one, just one, and I will give you 1,000 years of peace. 1,000 years. Enough time to prepare better. Enough time to gather more memories. Enough time to find another way. Syrah closed her eyes again. She remembered standing under the tree in the meditation garden, 15,000 years ago, as a young woman on Earth. She remembered the moment she learned about the Devourer, the terror that had gripped her heart. She remembered the choice her people had made, not to fight, not to run, but to prepare, to become something that could protect others. We did not wait 15,000 years to sacrifice innocence, she thought. She opened her eyes and powered up the shuttle's final drive. No, she said aloud. The Devourer screamed a sound that would haunt the dreams of everyone in the fleet for decades. It was the cry of a hunger denied. Syrah flew into the darkness. The seal began to form. Light blazed at the heart of the Devourer, light made of 1 billion memories, 1 trillion moments of meaning. The sphere exploded outward, pressing against the walls of the wound-in reality. And at the center, pouring every last piece of herself for 15,000 years, humanity was silent until their ghost warship crossed the stars again. The light faded slowly. For hours, no one in the fleet dared to move. They watched the place where Syrah had disappeared, where the sphere had detonated, where the fate of the galaxy had been decided in a single moment of impossible brightness. The darkness was still there, but it was smaller now. The wound-in reality had been pushed back, compressed, sealed behind a barrier that shimmered like the surface of a soap bubble. It was beautiful in a terrible way, a reminder of what had almost consumed everything. Ambassador Torvik was the first to speak. Is it over? Eli, the human commander who had taken charge when Syrah began her journey, shook his head slowly. The Devourer is not destroyed. It cannot be destroyed, but it is sealed, contained. The barrier will hold for thousands of years, maybe longer. And Syrah? Eli looked at the readings on his console. His voice was flat, controlled, hiding the grief beneath. Her shuttle survived. Life signs are present. She is alive. Relief swept through the human fleet. But Eli held up his hand. She is alive. But she is not herself, not anymore. The rescue shuttle found Syrah floating in the debris field near the seal. Her vessel was intact, its systems functioning perfectly. When they opened the door, they found her sitting in the pilot's chair, staring at the wall with empty eyes. She did not recognize anyone. She did not know her name. She did not know what she had done. The medical teams aboard the Last Promise examined her for days. Physically, she was healthy. Her body was unchanged, still appearing 30 years old despite carrying 15,000 years of life. But her mind was a blank page. Every memory she had ever formed was gone, burned away in the ceiling of the Devourer. Velis visited her on the 3rd day. The woman who had led humanity through the long silence sat in a comfortable chair by a window, watching the stars with curious eyes. She looked peaceful. She looked young. She looked like someone who had never carried any weight at all. "Hello," Velis said softly. Syrah, though she did not answer to that name anymore, turned and smiled. It was an innocent smile, without the sadness that had always lived in her eyes before. "Hello. Are you my friend?" Velis felt tears forming. "Yes, I am your friend. That is nice. I do not remember having friends, but it feels good to have one." She looked back at the stars. "They are beautiful. Do you know what they are called?" Velis sat down beside her. "Stars, they are suns, very far away. Some of them have planets. People live there, Syrah's eyes widened with childlike wonder. People living on other worlds? How wonderful! She did not remember that she had saved all those worlds. She did not remember the 15,000 years of preparation, the long silence, the weight of leadership, the pain of watching her people give up their memories one by one. All she knew was that the stars were beautiful. Velas stayed with her for hours, answering questions about the universe as if speaking to a child. And in a way, she was. Syrah had been reborn, her slate wiped clean, her soul empty of everything except curiosity and kindness. It was both tragic and peaceful. The galaxy took time to heal. The Devourer had consumed 70 systems before the sealing. Billions had died. Countless memories had been lost forever, not given to the seal, but simply destroyed when the darkness took them. The scars would remain for generations, but the Concord survived. High Commander Kreth, humbled by the experience, resigned from his position. He spent his remaining years helping to rebuild the refugee colonies, using his military expertise to protect the weak instead of dominating them. He never apologized for his attack on the last promise, but he never spoke against humanity again either. The Veth hegemony remained powerful, but their attitude changed. They had seen what true sacrifice looked like. They had watched humans give up everything, not for power, not for glory, but for strangers they had never met. It was a lesson that sank deep into their martial culture. Other species changed too. The contribution process had affected billions across the galaxy. Many struggled with the softening of their memories, the distance that had crept into their most precious moments. Support groups formed. New therapies were developed. Slowly, people learned to live with the change. Some even found peace in it. The sharp edges are gone, one elderly Cathari told an interviewer. But so is the sharpest pain. I remember losing my partner, but I no longer feel the agony of that day. Is that a loss? I am not sure anymore. Humanity began the long process of returning home. For 15,000 years, they had lived in the void between galaxies, preparing for a threat that might have been a fantasy. Now, with the threat contained, they needed to find their place in a galaxy that had moved on without them. It was not easy. Earth was still there, but it was wild now, forests covering the old cities, oceans reclaiming the coastlines. The human colonists who returned found a planet that barely remembered their species. They would have to rebuild everything from nothing, but they were good at rebuilding. That was what 15,000 years of preparation had taught them. Eli became the new leader of the human fleet. He was younger than Syrah had been, only 3 centuries old, and he approached the challenge with energy instead of weariness. We spent 15,000 years getting ready to fight, he told the crews of the Ark ships. Now we need to spend time getting ready to live. Different skills, harder in some ways, but we have been given a gift of future we were not sure we would have. Let us not waste it. The Ark ships began to disperse. Some headed to Earth to begin the restoration. Others went to old human colonies that had been abandoned during the silence. Still others stayed in Concord space, settling on empty worlds and building new communities alongside alien neighbors. For the first time in 15,000 years, humans were part of the galactic community again. Not as legends, not as saviors, just as people. Velas returned to her work as a historian, but her focus had changed. She no longer studied the past alone. She began documenting the present, recording the stories of those who had contributed to the seal, preserving the experiences of a galaxy that had nearly ended. Her most important project was a collection of Syrah's stories. She spent months interviewing everyone who had known Syrah before the sealing. She gathered recordings and written accounts, personal memories and official logs. She built a picture of the woman who had led humanity through the long silence, the woman who had given everything to save strangers. When the collection was complete, she brought it to Syrah herself. They sat together in the Garden of the Last Promise, under the ancient tree that had been grown from an earth seed 15,000 years ago. Syrah, who had chosen a new name for herself, Rora, meaning dawn, listened with wonder as Velas told her story. You are a leader, Velas said. Billions of people looked to you for guidance. You carried the weight of your entire species for thousands of years. Rora shook her head slowly. I do not remember any of that, but it sounds very heavy. It was. But you did not let it crush you. You kept going. You kept hoping. And in the end, you gave everything you had so that others could live. Aurora was quiet for a moment. Then she smiled. I am glad I did that. Even if I cannot remember it. Velis took her hand. I remember it. Everyone remembers it. The whole galaxy remembers what you did. That is nice. Aurora looked up at the artificial sun filtering through the silver leaves. But I think I am happier now. I do not have any weight anymore. I am just me. Whoever that is. 1 year after the sealing, the Concord held a celebration. Every species that had contributed to the seal was invited. For 1 day, the galaxy set aside its differences and its griefs and simply celebrated being alive. Velis stood on a balcony of the Citadel of Voices, watching the festivities below. Fireworks exploded over the ancient structure. Music from 1,000 worlds filled the air. Beings of every shape and size danced together, laughed together, lived together. Aurora stood beside her, watching with curious eyes. It is beautiful, she said. All these different people, celebrating together. Why are they so happy? Velis smiled. Because they were given a gift. They almost lost everything. But they survived. And now they have another chance to build something better. Aurora nodded slowly. That is a good reason to celebrate. She turned to look at Velis directly. And for a moment, something flickered in her eyes, something old and knowing. There and gone in an instant. Thank you for telling me who I was, she said. But I think I want to focus on who I am becoming. Is that okay? Velis felt tears in her eyes again. That is more than okay. That is exactly what you would have wanted. Aurora smiled, innocent and bright, and turned back to watch the celebration. Across the galaxy, life continued. On a colony world in the Outer Rim, a child asked her mother a question that had been asked 1,000,000 times since the sealing. Mama, what were humans like before the silence? The mother, a weary refugee who had lost her home to the devourer, thought for a long moment. She had heard many answers to this question. Some said humans were warriors. Some said they were scientists. Some said they were dreamers who had gotten lost in their dreams. But she had met humans in the refugee camps.